I'm joined on the Crispin Flintoff show by John McEvoy, who's obviously from Declassified UK, but is also the co-director of a new film that's coming out this year, Britain and the Other 9/11. How you doing, John?
Yeah, very well, thank you, Crispin. How you doing?
I'm good. Yeah, I had no idea about the significance of this weekend in terms of anniversaries until I spoke to your collaborator on the film, Pablo Navarrete, who pointed out that it's it's 25 years since this story was reported on the BBC. Pinochet set free. Former Chilean dictator General Augusto Pinochet will not be extradited on torture charges and is free to leave the UK. Home Secretary Jack Straw has decided. Mr. Straw believes the general is medically unfit to stand trial in England. Without any last-minute legal challenges, the general could be on a plane home within hours, ending 16 months of wrangling over his future. So it's quite a long time ago, obviously. I'm keen to hear a refresher on who Pinochet was, what he did, and also what this wrangle was about. I mean, how could he have been set free? Could you give us a background on that?
Yeah, of course. So Augusto Pinochet was the head of the military junta that presided over Chile between 1973 and 1990. Now, he came to power by way of a military coup on the 11th of September 1973, which overthrew the democratically elected socialist government of Salvador Allende, notoriously with US support. Covertly as well, the UK government, as we're going to show in this film, had also been conducting spoiling operations, covert propaganda operations to delegitimize Salvador Allende and put a stop to his socialist project. So, following the coup in 1973, Pinochet presided over one of the worst human rights catastrophes in the world, I would say. He immediately set about rounding up, imprisoning, torturing, and in many cases murdering the armed and unarmed leftist opposition in Chile. Thousands of people were killed. The Chilean Truth Commission found that roughly 30,000 people were tortured in some of the most disgraceful conditions imaginable. Many women, for example, were subjected to sexual forms of torture. Um, we visited some of the sites for the filming for the documentary, such as Via Grimaldi and Venda Sexy, which were kind of key sites where men and women were subjected to kind of heinous forms of physical and sexual abuse um, for their political opinions, for their political opposition to the Pinochet regime, for their support for socialist projects, and for their support for the preceding Allende government. Um, in addition to the 30,000 people who were tortured under the Pinochet regime, around 200,000 Chileans were exiled from the country, many forced to flee because of their political opinions, a number of whom, roughly eight or so, we interviewed, in fact, in Britain. I mean, there's many Chilean refugees still in Britain who we spoke to about their experiences of oppression under the dictatorship, the conditions under which they fled to the UK, and their kind of and their perspectives on the UK government's support for Pinochet, because I think this is a key aspect really which isn't discussed enough, which is the extent to which the UK government backed, sponsored, and supported the Pinochet regime while it was and supported the Pinochet regime while it was committing many of these crimes, particularly the Margaret Thatcher government, who was in power, of course, between 79 and 90. Thatcher, I mean, was an ideological bedfellow of Pinochet. They both kind of brought neoliberal shock therapy to their respective countries. Pinochet, of course, provided crucial support to the UK during its war with Argentina over the Falklands Islands. There was also a significant degree of military collaboration between Chile and Britain during the Thatcher years. Arms sales that Thatcher knew very well were going to be used to conduct repressive acts inside Chile, and so on. And so that kind of that's some background to who
Right.
Pinochet was.
How did he end up in the UK? I mean, I can't quite remember what that was all about.
Yeah, for sure. So in 1988, Pinochet called a plebiscite or a vote on the continuation of his dictatorship, basically. And he expected to win that plebiscite. He expected the Chilean people to say, we want you to continue in power. However, the no vote eventually won. Pinochet had to be dragged kicking and screaming out of power 2 years later after having lost that vote. And in 1990, Chile returned to democratic governance. But Pinochet remained the head of the armed forces, and he also remained a senator for life in Chile. And in that position during the 1990s, up until 1998, when he was arrested in Britain, he made various different trips to the UK, most of which were to support arms sales or to buy arms for the Chilean military. And there was also a lot of corruption that was found, particularly regarding deals with Britain's major arms corporation, BAE Systems. And so I think he visited the UK during that period around 7 times, often meeting, in fact, with Margaret Thatcher as well. They met up together for tea. Margaret Thatcher bought him bottles of whiskey. I mean, they shared, beyond a kind of political alliance, quite a close friendship. But in 1998, Spanish judge called Baltasar Garzon, he kind of caught wind that Pinochet was visiting Europe. He was going to be in Britain, and he decided to launch a kind of private arrest application for Pinochet over crimes that were committed against Spanish civilians in Chile during the years of the dictatorship. So between 1973 and 1983, roughly 200 Spanish civilians were killed by the Pinochet regime. And this was treated as an extraditable offence by the Spanish magistrate who issued the extradition request. So this was conveyed to the British authorities, and the British authorities reacted. They basically found that the crimes that were cited in the extradition request, specifically torture and murder, they were extraditable crimes in the UK, and there was a sufficient enough case against Pinochet to go through with the extradition request. And Pinochet, who was at that time in the London clinic getting assistance he was getting back surgery in the London clinic, he was arrested by the Metropolitan Police. He was held held in the hospital over the coming days. And over the following 503 odd days, 16 odd months, there was a major kind of legal proceedings against Pinochet for the UK government, then under Tony Blair, to decide whether or not to extradite him to Spain for those crimes. So that's the background to why Pinochet was in the UK, why there's an extradition request from Spain, and why he was ultimately arrested.
Right. Well, I mean, that sounds like a long time. He was being held, and no decision was made. So, what was this idea is medically unfit to stand trial? On what basis was that? And how fit was he after that decision was made? Was he fit enough to go where he wanted to go?
Yeah, so there were a number of decisions that the UK government and the UK courts had to make over that kind of 16-month period. The first of which were they extraditable offences, yes. The second of which, could Pinochet claim immunity as a former head of state? And the UK courts decided that no, he was no longer a head of state. He was a former head of state, and he was visiting the UK as a private citizen rather than on behalf of the Chilean government. So the UK government and courts effectively found that it was possible to extradite Pinochet to Spain. However, as you mentioned, what they managed to do was to use a get-out clause, which was to allow him to return to Chile on so-called compassionate grounds. And this was basically the justification for this was found in an extremely controversial medical report, which said that Pinochet was unable or unfit to stand trial. And this was relied upon by Jack Straw, then New Labour's Home Secretary, who used that as an excuse to say Pinochet is unfit to stand trial, and we're going to allow him to return to Chile. Now, in an article that's going to be published this week or the coming week when this interview comes out on your show, we're going to be publishing an article in Declassified based on recently declassified files, which shows there was a kind of complicating factor, a kind of dubious complicating factor in this entire process. Now, the declassified files show that Tony Blair was informed by his private secretary that Pinochet, in fact, was promised healthcare in the UK back during the 1980s in return for Chile support to Britain during the Falklands War. And basically, this was seen as a complicating factor because, you know, Britain had made Pinochet this promise, and it was difficult to kind of go back on it. Now, this is the only file that I've seen that has been declassified on this subject. I predict that many more in the future, maybe 5-10 years, will be declassified on the issue. But it shows that beyond the kind of formal deliberations that were made, there were a significant and serious amount of back channel discussions that were going on. And there were also deals that had been made decades prior that impacted the deal. It all effectively centered around Britain's capacity to wage war in the future and in the past. To bring it to the current genocide in Gaza, you've seen the UK government on various different occasions give special immunity to Israeli officials that are visiting Britain. And that kind of that legal framework, which was developed after the Pinochet precedent, was specifically designed to prevent what happened to Pinochet happening to other foreign officials who are guilty of war crimes and crimes against humanity. So you can kind of see a continuation of Pinochet's case and effectively trying to prevent that from happening again, prevent anybody from being arrested on UK soil, particularly those countries who are allies of Britain, such as Israel. So you can kind of see the echoes of the past occurring right now during the genocide in Gaza.
So can you tell us a bit about the film that you're making or that's going to come out this year, Britain and the Other 9/11? Can you tell us what it's about and you know generally what to expect?
Yeah, of course. So what we've just discussed is just one element of the film, really. The film, as you mentioned, is called Britain and the Other 9/11. It focuses its focal point is the coup in Chile on the 11th of September 1973. But it basically shows a 40-year period of UK complicity in the destruction of Chilean democracy. We start in the 1960s and show how the UK government covertly sought to discredit and delegitimize Salvador Allende and his socialist project. We show how the UK government supported the coup in 1973 and then proceeded during the Thatcher years to promote and provide military and security and intelligence assistance to the Pinochet regime. And then ultimately, under New Labour, how the British government was also complicit or responsible, actually, in allowing Pinochet to evade justice for war crimes and crimes against humanity. So it's a 40-year history of British complicity in the destruction of Chile's democracy.
Obviously, the film is going to take a lot of work on editing and footage and stuff like that. Do you need any support with funding for that?
Yeah, so we're launching a final crowdfunder, basically a finishing funds crowdfunder at the moment. We're looking for £3,000 altogether. As you mentioned, yeah, it's been a lot of work. We've done 2 lots of filming in Chile. We've filmed in Spain. We've done 3 lots of of filming in the UK as well. And that's in addition to all of the archival work that we've been doing for this film. So it's been a lot of work. And yeah, just to get us over the line, we're trying to raise a few grand basically to cover the costs. So if anybody's able to help us with that, that'd be massively appreciated.
All right, I'll put the link in the comments and also let people see the link in the actual video. So there you go. I'll make sure if you want to help, do please.